The 2020 Formula One season is drawing towards its conclusion, and that means a lot of the rolling updates and the technical bits and bobs you've seen on the cars through the season, that process has sort of come to an end for a lot of the teams, particularly those at the front. Red Bull and Mercedes, that's certainly the case. However, in the middle of the pack, there is an almighty battle going on for third in the Constructors' Championship, and there's a whole bunch of teams fighting over that position. Well, that's where the real development race is still going on. So I thought I'd take a look through how each of the teams are getting on. Firstly, helped out by this wonderful AWS graphic, using Mercedes as the datum, so everybody compared to Mercedes, how they've developed forwards. Well, let's take a look at that midfield fight, starting with Renault. Don't forget, they're using a year-old chassis on that car. They've gone forward significantly in terms of development, and that's really worked out well for them. And then Ferrari, Racing Point, McLaren, and at the back AlphaTauri. We'll talk about each of those cars in particular detail on the issues they're facing with the final races. I think this battle is far from over, not just from the points, but also from a technical standpoint. So let's start in reverse championship order, and that means we've got to start with AlphaTauri, who've made quite a big leap forward in car development. But if you look at their results through the season, one of their drivers, Pierre Gasly, has had a race win and a lot of great results. But the other driver, Daniel Kvyat, has struggled a lot with the car. And the team have boiled this down to the steering rack, which is located behind this carbon fibre cover at the front of the car. Kvyat isn't happy with the steering feel of the AT01, so the team have done a lot of work behind the scenes. It's nothing you can really see from outside, but they've changed the valving maybe slightly, changed the settings on that power steering system, and that allows the Russian to just get a better feel from the car. But that's not all they've done. I suspect, and the team won't confirm this, they've changed their front suspension geometry ever so slightly, perhaps out on the upright end, just to give the driver a little bit more feel, a little bit more comfort in the car. Obviously in Turkey everybody's fighting with the handling of their cars because the tyres are too hard, but Kvyat in particular has probably started to feel the car a little bit better than he had. However, what they've actually probably done is make the car less perfect from an engineering standpoint. Now you see this quite a lot in all forms of motor racing, where the engineer will come up with a perfect setup for the car, the driver gets in the car and he just doesn't like it, it feels undrivable. They have to tune that setup to work with the driver, give him confidence in the car and allow him to drive it. Even if the computers say that setup is not the best way to go ahead, you've got to get a car that a driver can drive, and that's what AlphaTauri have been doing with Daniel Kvyat. If he can start scoring points in the way Pierre Gasly will, look for those white and blue cars to jump forward in the Constructors' Championship. Well, next up, Ferrari, and as we know, they've been struggling all season to get the best out of the SF1000. Well, that's one team that is continuing its update programme, and in Turkey, Ferrari have bought some new parts to the car. But let's have a look at the journey that brought them to Istanbul. Take a look at the rear floor section here. You can see this little pop-up bit at the back of the floor. That's to manage the airflow around the inner edge of the rear tyre and help seal the diffuser. Well, at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, they introduced these three little sticky-uppy bits at the back of the floor. Same reason, same approach, but maybe a better way of doing it. Coming to Istanbul, that's reduced to two slightly larger sticky-uppy bits, and they've been honed in a very particular way in CFD. And this is all to do with a big update section that Ferrari have been bringing to the rear of the car. Now, I'll just pause that there because it's worth taking a look at this on the diffuser of the car. The teams don't really like us showing you the diffusers of the car, but we're going to anyway. These drop-down sections, strakes as we call them in the industry, have a little bit of feathering on the bottom. Now, in preparation for 2021, at one of the recent races, Ferrari bought a flat floor. You saw that in Tech Talk at the Portuguese Grand Prix. And they also changed the strakes to make them slightly shorter to meet the 2021 regulations. A lot of people reported that, and that's been all over the internet. What not a lot of people realised is in Portugal, Ferrari bought 3 different specifications of diffuser on the rear of the floor of the car. And this is the specification that's being used in Turkey. It's got these little feathered sections, about 4 or 5 of them there, on both sides of the centre line. There is another version which we've seen raced that doesn't have the feathered section at all, and it's a slightly more curved, solid plate of a strake at the back there. This is all to do with managing those vortices coming out from under the floor and getting the most out of the downforce of the car. Now, Ferrari have been experimenting with 3 different diffusers, which means one's for 2021, one's new, one's old, and maybe one doesn't work properly, and they haven't quite worked out which works properly, but the fact that they've reverted to this version rather than the solid strake that we saw in Portugal suggests that that version maybe didn't work as Ferrari intended, and that's why they're mucking around on the rear bits of the floor as well. Coming to Racing Point, and obviously Racing Point got loads of headlines earlier in the season and, well, pretty much all the way through 2020. This was the copycat cars scandal. Racing Point for 2020 took the last year's Mercedes World Championship winning car, took loads of photos of it and made essentially a copy of it to race this year. And a lot of the teams are saying it's the fastest of the midfield cars, but they've had some bad luck and some poor strategy calls as the season's gone on. Well, it caused protests. Renault were very unhappy with the Racing Point and they were protested. The protests were upheld. Racing Point were fined, their brake ducts were deemed illegal and they lost Constructors' Championship points, but were allowed to continue with those otherwise illegal parts. Well, a lot of the teams weren't happy with that resolution and wanted a bit more. However, the FIA has sort of pacified them by changing the technical and sporting regulations for next year to ban this approach of copycat cars. And what that means is any form of stereo photogrammetry, using two different cameras to create a 3D model of a different component of a car, that's all been specifically banned, as has any form of 3D scanning, any form of software where you can take photos from different angles and then reassemble a three-dimensional shape in a CAD system. That's all been really strictly outlawed. The FIA is going to be taking a really close look at every single car on the grid, and if two cars have some fairly similar design features, the FIA will go to both teams and ask them to essentially show their working out. How did you develop this part? What's the origins of it? Show us your concept sketches, show us your evolution of design. They need to make sure that this hasn't just been copied. What hasn't been banned is going and taking a look at a rival's car, taking a couple of pictures of it, having to think about how that part works, taking it away, and then going and developing your own version. That's still completely legal, but you might have to just have a conversation with some FIA officials to prove that while you got the idea from another team, you haven't straight copied it, you've gone away, done your own working out, come out with your own sketches and come up with your own concept that may be very similar, but it's not the same. It's not copying, it's inspiration. Inspiration's legal, copying is not. And Racing Point, that's their big factor for 2021. For 2020 though, not many updates expected on the car. They need to sort out their races, they need to sort out their strategy because they do probably have the fastest car in the field, but is there much scope for more development in it? Probably not, and they could be swamped by their big rivals. Which brings us to the final two teams in this chunk of the Constructors' Championship. And these two teams have been at each other's throats all season long. They have different strengths and different weaknesses. And the first of those teams, Renault, has a really obvious weakness. It's reliability, and that was really clearly demonstrated at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. And as Esteban Ocon came over the crest there, the Renault conked out, and it retired from the race in a very smoky, rather spectacular fashion that completely changed the outcome of the overall Grand Prix. But that's just an example of the troubles that Renault have had all season long, and that's cost them a lot of points. But their arch rivals, McLaren, haven't actually had a completely clear run either. McLaren has got a car that works really well in the fast corners, whereas the Renault works really well in the slow corners. McLaren brought along a big update package to its car partway through, late in the season. Put all of these bits on, Mercedes-style nose, new front wing, new barge boards, a few other bits and bobs, and it didn't work. The drivers hated it. That's an example of what we were talking about earlier with AlphaTauri. The engineers come up with a good solution that they think's good, the computer says it's good, the wind tunnel says it's good, the drivers hate it. So then McLaren had to go away, they'd taken a backward step, they took off all of those new parts, then reintroduced them one by one to find that sweet spot on the car. That process is still going on in Turkey. They're still experimenting with two different types of front wing, but the drivers now seem a lot more comfortable in the car and it's beginning to move forward, which is important because the Renault is also moving forward by big margins. And the two are pretty much locked together. But with the tracks remaining, they potentially favour the McLaren more than the Renault. That big flat-out blast through the desert at the penultimate round of the season, that really does look like a McLaren circuit, and Renault could struggle with reliability with all that flat-out running. Fastest race in history, probably. So that could be a challenge for Renault. Renault, though, with all the development on their car, that surprised a lot of people in the paddock. Let's not forget the Renault is using a year-old chassis, and they'll roll that through to 2021 as well, with potentially a change to the roll hoop. But otherwise, it's an old car that's being developed forwards, and that shows real strength for Renault and Alpine into 2021. Meanwhile, McLaren, they're going to have to spend a lot of time adapting a car that was designed around a Renault power unit to a Mercedes power unit for next season. Will it work out? I think Renault are in the better position, but they've got an old chassis. McLaren have got a new engine that wasn't designed for the power unit. These two could be locked together for another 12 months, and it's going to be great to watch. So to sum up, looking at the midfield battle in terms of technical development at least, well, Ferrari and Renault are at the top of the development race, but not in terms of the Constructors' Championship points race. All of these teams in the midfield, though, can take those points off each other. They can all make big wins and maybe get race wins. Pierre Gasly did it in Monza. Can any of the others get on top of the podium before the season comes to the end? I'm really excited to watch that.